Average Joe travels the California Inscape. Season 5, Children of the Pumpkins. Episode 4, Bring Me the Head of Sammy Spunker. Story by Penguin Pete. Written by Clyde Wren. Alternate Tuesdays by Dodge Zelko. With Asher Ephraim as the voice of Spanky McDongle. And featuring the vocal stylings of This Is Signal. The case had taken an alarming turn, but here in Lucretia St. Germain's bizarre home, which felt more like a New England mausoleum, it seemed just about right. Our pro bono client was gone, vanished into nothing while none of us were watching. Lucretia had a tiny fey infiltrator trapped under a rocks glass. After the cloud of lucky smoke I gifted the little jailbird, the thing probably smelled like pool hall felt that needed changing. We resolved to spread out and look for Sammy Spunker as Lucretia dumped the ashes from a round censer about the size of a coaster. She slid it under the glass where naughty Cupid was trapped, and we were on our way. I silently volunteered to check the kitchen. If I didn't find Spunker there, it was as good a place as any to fail. When I reached the kitchen, there were no more glass decanters full of expensive hooch. I did notice, though, one detail that didn't quite sit right. A butcher's knife stood upright on the counter, its tip stuck into a bare maple cutting board. I thought this would be a good time for us to muster again. "Come on in here, gang. Get a load of this." They were there in seconds. I pointed to the knife and continued. Unless our host was planning on serving up a charcuterie board, and I don't believe she was, this might be worth noting. Lucretia?
No, Joe. That was not my intention.
Lucretia curled her bony fingers around the knife's handle and yanked it free. When she took a step away from the counter, Sammy materialized behind her. He promptly collapsed, breathless and dazed, and was quick to make sense of it for the rest of us.
Ah, poor thing. He was attacked there. As long as the area he vanishes from is still a threat to him, he's trapped in his other place, a place he should never have to go to. When we moved the knife, he was able to come back.
Lucretia's face was the picture of smug satisfaction as she took in her pupil's reasoning. If I didn't know better, I'd say she was about to smile. Her countenance changed quickly as she turned her attention to the fairy trapped under the glass on the counter.
You did this, didn't you? You cockroach.
Lucretia drove her message home when she gave the glass a crisp tap with the knife blade. It must have been deafening to the villainette inside. It fell to its knees and covered its ears, gibbering wildly. Lucy helped Sammy to his feet and led him again to the study. I noticed a word written above the door, below the transom. We'll take a moment to let you look that up. The letters were not of any alphabet I could remember seeing. The same letters were carved into the floor, right on the threshold. Lucretia gently pushed Sammy through the doorway and spoke a couple of words from a language I could not identify.
You will be safe in here, Mr. Spunker. This room is warded so that no one may enter or leave it now. I invite the rest of you to try and take some rest tonight. Nothing will harm you here. Before we retire, I thank you, Joe, for your inspiration.
Well, I'm just an average Joe. That's all you got. No, another time. Inspiration for what?
Charcuterie.
Lucretia clapped her hands 3 times, and we immediately heard the footsteps of her staff moving toward the kitchen. She handed me the knife, and I led our crew back to the scene of the action. Charcuterie sounded good, but I'll be damned if I wasn't also going to find something nice to wash it down. I don't think the sun had been up for long when I rose to join it. There were no birds singing, and this lavish guest room in Lucretia's mansion was the perfect place to die of consumption. To make matters worse, my first thought was of Chief Wankins and how I would have to call him. I lit a Lucky and picked up the receiver from the phone on the nightstand beside my grim nest. The person who answered the phone asked me to wait while he fetched Chief Wankins. The manifold voices and sounds on the other end of the phone suggested an active morning at the Chatterskull Falls Police Department headquarters. At last, Wankins's porcine tones spilled mercilessly into my defenseless ear.
Wankins, what do you want, Joe?
I could almost smell the cheap coffee breath and see him flicking bits of bear claw glaze from his fingers. Morning, Chief. It's early. Why so tense?
You have no idea. I got bounty hunters shooting up the town like it's Dodge City. These freaking little fairies flitting all over like they're on pep pills or Jolly Beans or something. We got a cult, a pumpkin cult, a freaking cult devoted to pumpkins. And it's only for men. But not just men, there's pumpkins in it. The pumpkins are in it, Joe. And now I got you on the horn. Yeah, maybe you ought to be a little tense too.
This phone call was outstanding. Maybe today would be a better day than the one before. Here's a spoonful of sugar for you, Chief. You can spread the word that the bounty on Sammy Spunker is off. It's done. So all those cowboys can go back to wherever they came from. According to Lucretia, the Fae would never have paid a bounty anyway. It was just a way for them keeping Sammy guessing and maybe flush him out so they could recapture him. But Wankins didn't need the whole story. He never did, really.
Okay. I'll put that out to the bartenders for starters. They'll get the word to the right people.
And the Fae, the ones who put the bounty on Spunker to begin with, are satisfied. You won't see them carrying on that way anymore either. Wankins paused to digest this last bit.
I guess I'll have to take your word for that, Joe. The pumpkin cult is public enemy number 1, though. Tell you what, you take care of the pumpkins for me, and I know for a fact we have a little something in the budget for our, civil defense special deputies. Yeah, you and your lady friend can consider yourself duly authorized peace officers for this. Sound good? Good.
It sounded fine, I suppose, but I didn't have the chance to reply before he hung up. No questioning a man of Wankins's importance. Oh, Wankins. At least we might squeeze a few bones out of this now. Downstairs, Lucretia and Anne sat with Sammy and Spanky. They each had half-empty plates in front of them and full steaming cups of coffee. Except for Spanky. No coffee for Spanky. Were they all like this? Or was it just cruel kismet that we ended up with the one, simple-minded leprechaun? Some questions, this certainly among them, were simply unanswerable. I watched as Lucretia pushed a piece of buttered toast under the glass and whispered to the ravenous fairy inside. Between bites, it gibbered and giggled. Gibbered and giggled. Between bites, it gibbered and giggled, gesticulating and hopping up and down. Then I got the two-pronged lecture from the teacher and the student. Lucy and Anne took great pains to remind me of what a dangerous and unique foe we were fighting. They were deceptive. The Fae, that is. Also Lucretia and Anne, but at least they were on my side. Okay. Never reveal anything about yourself to them. Check. They could assume other forms. Right, I'd seen that. If they offer any sort of bargain, do not agree to it because you will be swindled. Well, nothing new there, but fine. Sounded a lot like the working girls in Singapore. According to my sources. We've covered all this, ladies. Isn't it time we roll up our sleeves and go mix it up with the little devils? How did you come to know so much about them anyway? Lucretia gave Anne a long look across the table, then turned to me.
Well, Joseph, Sammy is not the only one who is fey-touched here at the table.
I had the feeling Lucretia wasn't referring to herself. Spanky was undoubtedly touched. By what, I couldn't say. Anne looked up at me and began.
She means me, Joe. I have direct experience with them.
I'd been to this restaurant before. Somewhere after the soup and before dessert, the lady across the table was going to tell you something you didn't know. Something big. And she did.
My father was not... He wasn't able to have children, and so he was alone. He began to study, as I did, and took some interest in the occult, the esoteric. But he chose the left-handed path, and his study was not thorough. He thought it would be a good idea to contact the Fae to realize his highest ambition, to have a daughter. They granted him his wish, but it was a promise with a catch. Once his own father passed, the Fae would require my father to return to them once a year to gamble. If he lost to them in their game, he would be required to serve them. My grandfather died just after my 6th birthday. His funeral was the last time I saw my father. I hope the Fae never found him, but I always thought someday I might. I still do.
The only sound in the kitchen was Spanky's fork against the plate as he stabbed at his scrambled eggs. We all have a story. Anne has hers. Lord knows I have mine. It's back there, somewhere, where it belongs, in the puddles and the smoke. We are what we are because of it. The places we've been, the books we've read, the hearts we've broken, the people who've betrayed us. I don't like my story. I'm sick and tired of watching it, over and over every night in the small dark hours. But now that I've heard some of Anne's, I just want to hear some more. Lucretia stood up and opened the window on the other side of the kitchen. After retrieving the imprisoned Fae, she brought it to the window and released it. She turned back to us, erect and uncompromising.
We have a plan.
Spanky forced out a few words through the eggs in his mouth.
I would be of most value to the team if I just stayed here until the, mission ends, kind of holding the fort. The anchor man. The glue that holds it all together. The stone, if you will.
Lucretia ignored him and continued.
I have bound the Fae spy to me. With my scrying orb, I can see through its eyes and hear through its ears. I've instructed it to go to the leader of its tribe, so that I may negotiate with him directly. We should be able to begin negotiations quite soon. These creatures are as impatient as they are treacherous.
Anne spoke up with the same question I had.
What guarantee do we have that the fairy spy will honor his promise? Their word is universally regarded as worthless.
Predictably, Lucretia had already considered this.
I put a mark on a little friend. All I need to do is speak the word, and the spy will be reduced to charred bone and ashes. That is why I allowed it to whisper its riddle to me and leave.
Hearing about the Fae's whispered riddle was new to me. The riddle before the riddle. Riddle? I wondered aloud. Anne explained.
When parting with a Fae, especially one you've bargained with, they speak in prophecy. It's always in the form of a riddle.
Lucretia took the floor again.
If you will excuse me, I am retiring to the study. My orb is there, and that is where I will navigate the whims of this Fae chieftain.
She left the kitchen, and I pulled a couple of eggs from the refrigerator. I thought about clapping, but figured I'd be better off making the eggs myself. No one really understands what I mean by over-medium anyway. I prepared my eggs and ate them as Sammy brooded and Spanky chatted to no one in particular about nothing very specific. Anne politely nodded as we waited for Lucretia to return. and she soon did.
I have struck a bargain with the Fae. The contract on Mr. Spunker would be forfeit, but the Fae still mean to be compensated. It seems their slaves who work in the pumpkin patches have revolted. By establishing a pumpkin cult, they have managed to animate the pumpkins, threatening the Fae's security and the viability of the nutmeg market. We are charged with neutralizing the cult and their monstrous pumpkins. In exchange, the chieftain agreed to remove the curse from Mr. Spunker and declare his debt to be satisfied.
And Wankins was paying us to do it. This was working out just fine. Well above average, I'd say. I stood up and addressed the team. Perfect. The chief and the chieftain, as happy as a couple of larks at high tide with a bowl of punch on the blanket between them. Let's go smash some pumpkins. Lucretia shook her head.
No, Joe. The cultists are all male. We can't go storming in there. If we did, there would only be regret and infinite sadness.
Only males, huh? Well, I am one, I suppose. Spanky and Spunker both sank into their chairs and stared at the floor. I knew what was about to happen, but it was Lucretia who gave it a voice.
You will infiltrate the cult. When the opportunity arises, eliminate their leader. It is the only path to triumph.
I was never a fan of triumph. The body styles were a little too cute, and they leaked oil like the Dickens. But Lucretia was right. I began to imagine how I might pass myself off as a pumpkin-worshipping screwball. It was at that moment another question occurred to me. Say, Lucretia, what was the spy's parting riddle, its prophecy? She answered without revealing anything in her tone.
It whispered, when the last tree has fallen and the rivers run dry, you cannot eat money.
True enough, I reckoned. But talk is cheap, and it takes money to buy liquor. It was time to go make some.